Partnership Part 2. We're going to have some fun today. So I hope this all works. We've practiced. We're going to do some fun with the technology here, and we're going to use a fishbowl style for this forum. It's our first time trying this. We hope this might model a way that you can actually engage with community. So in the first section, we're going to give you all as attendees a chance to listen in to a conversation that might occur at a party or a dinner where an academic and community partnership is sharing what they do. This is going to be a time for you to sit back and watch and observe what's happening. Once the conversation comes to a close, we're going to put everyone into breakout rooms so that we can collectively in those breakout rooms brainstorm about questions for the partnership, questions that come up as you're observing these folks. So you might want to take some notes so that you can contribute those when we get into the breakouts. Each of the breakouts is going to have a facilitator, and we'll be using a little tool called Jamboard to capture questions, and then our moderators will ask those questions of our partnership folks during the questions and answers. So everybody will move back into the main room, and then we'll have that question and answer facilitated through the end of the forum. So next part, I want to introduce our partnership. So we have Josh Williams, the academic partner, and Adrian Miller, the community partner, who they teamed up together in 2019 to form the Curious Partnership. Great name. Curious stands for Coloradans Understanding Religion and Immunization Through Sustained Partnership. So they first got a CCTSI Community Engagement Partnership Development Award, and then went on to receive a Joint Pilot Project Award, which they're in the process of completing right now. Josh and Adrian are going to be joined by their coach, Gordon Duvall, and all of our CCTSI Community Engagement Pilot Grant awardees get assigned a coach to provide advice, guidance, and support. Additionally, our hope was to have their community partners. Pablo Zavala as one to be here. I don't know if Pablo has been able to join us, but if he's able to join us, he'll be a part of the conversation as well. Pablo served on the Partnerships Community Advisory Board and then helped extend the work into Spanish-speaking communities. Finally, I want to introduce our facilitators. These are two of our community research liaisons as part of CCTSI, Lorenzo Ramirez and Leslie Wright. If you attended the last forum, you may remember that these two folks, because they were part of that as well. They've been working with our CCTSI Community Engagement Corps for a long time, bridging the gaps and serving as the connection between our campus and their communities. So with that, we're going to move into the fishbowl.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lorenzo Ramirez, and welcome to the Community Engagement Forum, Understanding and Appreciating the Capacities of the Community Partnership Part 2. So I have a question. Yeah, I've heard a lot about this really cool project. If you could share a little bit about what the project is all about.
Yeah, Adrian, you want to tackle that, or should I, brother?
You can tackle it, and I'll give you backup if you need it.
All right, sounds good, man. Yeah, so Lorenzo, we've been heading around to different faith communities in the Denver metro area and Colorado Springs. Actually, for 3 years now, we've been visiting different faith communities. And over the last year, our focus has really been on visiting communities of color to specifically try and better understand concerns and questions people have around COVID and COVID vaccines, and to try and empower them with information. And even at a few events, mobile vaccination services on site to try and help address the inequities that we've seen here in Colorado with respect to COVID morbidity and mortality. But this project goes back even a little bit farther to 2019, and kind of in the wake of the measles outbreaks that we were having in the US around that time. I had done a study where I was looking at the rate of religious exemptions to vaccines required for kindergarten in the US. And I saw that the rate was increasing over time, even though simultaneously fewer and fewer people were identifying as religious in the US, and that kind of confused me. And so I wanted to find someone to go into some faith communities with me to ask some questions and just to see what faithful Coloradans thought about vaccines, if they were having religious questions about vaccines or if they were having secular questions about vaccines. And so I started looking for some community partners, and I knocked on Adrian's door after being shot down by a couple other people along the way. And Adrian, maybe I'll let you kind of take it from there.
Yeah, he caught me on an off day, so I said yes. I think that's a great summary. So just to provide a little bit of context, that first year, even though the Colorado Council of Churches primarily focuses in Christian communities, we did an interfaith approach. And so we met with different Christian communities and also a synagogue or a Jewish community connected to a synagogue, a Buddhist congregation, and some other things that we were working on we can talk about a little bit later. So we tried to have a broad approach when doing this work. It's been very interesting.
Oh, you guys, that sounds really cool. One of the questions was, like, were there any initial road bumps that you came across? Especially I didn't get the impression, Josh, that you knew Adrian and you caught Adrian in a weak moment and he said yes, but I know he's not a weak person, so.
Yeah. Let me take this one, Josh. I would say the roughest patch I think we had with the initial project was just getting the attention of faith leaders so we could do this work. For those of you who are part of faith traditions, you probably know this, faith leaders are very, very, very busy people. And so even though usually it's the people in the congregation that get stuff done, you need to have that faith leader buy-in. So we did a lot of outreach. I think we spent a lot of time outreaching to communities to have these events. And ultimately, it took us so long to connect with a Muslim community that when we finally got things set up to do the work, the pandemic hit. And so we actually never got to meet with that congregation. But, when Josh told me about the project, I mean, I was excited because it was something that I think faith communities should be looking at. I think people need to get outside the walls of their sacred communities, whatever the buildings are, and get out into the community. And so I thought this was a great way for the Colorado Council of Churches to do something meaningful for the broader community.
It's really cool.
Yeah. And I might add, Leslie, trying to find a community partner was a road bump or initial obstacle for me. And, there were a couple different people I had reached out to who were heads of interfaith organizations or other faith-based organizations here in Denver who I was hoping, would be interested to do this work with me. And several of them just had other priorities, which is totally fine, right? They were more committed to other priority areas at that moment. And so that was hard, feeling passionately like I wanted to get out into the community and really trying to find someone to work with. But it turned out that one of the people who told me no put me in contact with Adrian. And so it wasn't a totally, fruitless turn down there. And that's how these networks work. I think I've been learning. Everyone kind of knows each other in the community engagement world. And so, if one person's too busy to help out, they might be able to point you to someone else.
That's great.
Go. Were you going to go, Leslie?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So once you did identify a potential partner, how did the conversations go around balance and navigating power of the potential partnership?
I didn't see this as a difficulty or challenge at all, because Josh and I think just by temperament, we have generous spirits. And so, and the way that the project was unfolding, I think the divisions of labor just kind of made sense. I mean, a lot of my work was to get outreach to the communities and facilitate the contact and just make sure that the logistical support was there. And, Josh was really working on what kind of presentation to present. And then once we did it, it was collaborative in terms of, immediately after we would just have a talk about what went well, what didn't, and we were always fine tuning and tweaking to get to the right place. And if you look over the course of the last couple of years, there were some pivotal moments where we changed what we were doing, and I think increased the efficacy of the project.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the division of labor kind of fell naturally. And just to give attendees a better idea of what we were doing, the first phase of our partnership was really just about trying to figure out what questions about vaccines were important to religious Coloradans. That's really what the goal of that study was, is to sort them out, right? Are they secular in nature? Are they religious in nature? And it just so happened that the measles outbreak was happening at the same time. So we heard a lot of questions about measles, but those events we called listening circles, because that was the goal. It was just to listen, right? So we were there, we had butcher block paper, and we were just writing down questions that people had. And then there'd be a brief kind of answer period at the end of an hour and 15 minutes. We'd bring lunch, we'd bring refreshments, and we'd give an honorarium to the people, to the congregation that hosted the event. But as it kind of transitioned into phase 2, which was doing the same thing in communities of color, specifically with regards to COVID, like Adrian was saying, we kind of wanted to know, hey, are we actually changing people's minds here? Are we making people more confident in COVID vaccines, or, appropriately concerned about COVID per se? And so we started kind of tweaking what we were doing. We weren't just doing butcher block paper with questions anymore. Now we started administering pre-event surveys and post-event surveys to try and capture attitudinal changes. And then also saying, hey, if we're trying to convince people to get a vaccine and empower them with information, what if we brought mobile vaccination services and coordinated these events with that? And could we actually get some vaccines into arms as well? And so I think it was a really kind of fun division of labor as we each tackled, the changing needs of the partnership over time. It wasn't like we set out on day one and Adrian was only going to do X and I was only going to do Y. The responsibilities were constantly changing, and we just kind of naturally adapted to what we were best suited to.
Thank you.
That's really interesting. I appreciate that. I know also with these pilot grants for academic and community partners, in our model, we have a coach that joins us and often, and I was wondering, I think Gordon was your coach. Gordon, did you want to talk a little bit about how you interacted with the partnership?
Sure. This partnership was just so easy for me to be a coach. Both Josh and Adrian had their things together. I mean, every now and again, they would come to me with, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I, from a coaching standpoint, I really try to help those that I'm coaching to create the answers themselves. So that I would ask those questions that would allow them to then think a little bit deeper, because I knew they had the answers inside of them anyway to start with. And so my job was to pull those answers out. And so, from the original project, when they were just looking at vaccines, I'm very excited about vaccines, being a pediatric nurse practitioner myself, really knowing the importance. And so even I think at that point, it helped me train myself as a coach to not jump in and give advice and why don't we do this and why don't we do that? And really just to be that coach, to be somebody to bounce things off of. Every now and again, they would feel like, they were stuck, or who else could we talk to? And then that gave me the opportunity to make suggestions of different populations and different religious organizations that they might want to get in touch with. If I happened to have had a resource or a contact, I would give them that. But it wasn't like that I found myself jumping in and going and doing the work for them. All I did was give the ideas and the suggestions, and they did all the work. And it turned into an amazing project.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Oh, thanks, Gordon. And I just want to say, you always pointed us back to the community as well. I felt like, and not just, with those organizations we might reach out, but you always made a point to say, well, what does the community think of that question? I think that was a refrain over the course of our mentorship time with you. And that has really just been important for me as I think even about how to disseminate the results or, you know, approach a study design. It's just always going back to the community. What do they think?
I think in all the work that we do as far as public health or research, trust is key in anything that we do with community and in partnership or potential partnership, especially in communities of color. How did you establish trust within people that you wanted to bring to the table? And once they were at the table, how did that happen, especially within communities of color?
I think one of the keys was having a good relationship with that faith leader or with the lay leaders in a sacred community to do this work. I think they lent a lot of credibility to the project. And then once we were able to have those initial discussions and talk about what we were trying to do, I think that bridge really helped tremendously from my perspective.
Yeah. I think also, you know, trying to make the events tailored to the needs of the congregation was another thing that we were careful to do, because while in general we had this idea of kind of addressing initially questions about all vaccines, and then in our second phase, you know, questions pertaining to COVID and COVID vaccines, you know, we had multiple planning meetings with each faith community prior to the events, and we defined, you know, who was going to be in attendance, right? So who did that faith community wanted to attend? Was it anyone in the congregation? Was it a certain subgroup of the congregation? Like, you know, one of our initial events was just a young moms group at a synagogue, for example, because they were the ones perceived to have the most questions about vaccines. And so I think speaking to the needs of the community themselves, it's like, okay, yeah, you know, this is the need you perceive. Let's try and address that versus kind of coming in with our own agenda per se.
And I think another critical element is creating a safe space where people felt that they could ask any question or even say something contrary, you know, negative about vaccines. And I think, again, Dr. Josh is really good, just his presentation, and he's very accessible. And I think he helped create that environment. And it's remarkable because we don't trust each other, but we created this climate of trust. No, I'm just kidding. We trust each other immensely, but we created this climate of trust, I think, through that. And I think that helped a lot because, especially for the research, we wanted to hear from people who maybe had a skeptical view or you know, different opinion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you know, Adrian, as much as you joke about us not trusting each other, I will say that it's been just such a joy to befriend you over the years. And I think, you know, part of the trust that we've extended to the community is just trust that we've built ourselves. And so, you know, Adrian's like waking me up at 6 a.m. on New Year's Day with these little GIFs or GIFs, however you say that, on my phone. I'm not as tech savvy as he is. And, you know, I've been able to watch his meteoric rise as an award-winning African-American barbecue expert. And, you know, at times he's needed to ask for grace to do Netflix shows and other things. And at times I've needed to ask for grace for having young kids. And so, you know, being flexible and understanding with one another, I think just creates that relationship of trust where, you know, we're able to recommend one another kind of without reservation to the communities that we're going into as well.
Yeah, and just having that open dialogue is important, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's a wonderful example for community to actually witness and your efforts to establish trust.
One place where trust has broken down historically between academics and communities is when we get down to things like money. And, you know, it often, in many cases, the academic or the university holds the purse strings. And even with good intentions, that can be a deal breaker in terms of how do you decide. Communities put so much work in, and historically they, you know, researchers haven't treated them so well in that area. And how did you guys deal with that question?
Well, you know, I think the upfront work for this grant, the pilot project really helps because you create a memo of understanding and then you work through a budget. And so at that moment of working through a budget, you kind of think about, okay, what will it take to get this done? and how will the money work? So again, I think we are in a blessed situation because the divisions of labor and the way the project unfolded were kind of natural. So it was natural for me to take a chunk of money, not only just to cover my salary for doing it, but just doing the logistical work, getting to places, providing food. I must say, Dr. Josh has really expensive taste when it comes to lunch. And so, but didn't Satan ring in and say, hey, you know what, we would love to do that, but we just don't have the budget. So again, because we have that great relationship and I can just say, hey, man, this is what we can work with. I think that has helped. So we just have not had a lot of strife with budget. And I really do think it's that working up front when you apply for the grant to work through the budget and things that forces you to think through how it might work out. And then I have to say, I'm also grateful that we are, as long as we justify it, we are able to pivot mid-grant if we see that there are other needs that are rising and maybe what we thought we were going to spend in one area is not necessary. We talk it out and then we circle back and ask for, some kind of just an allowance to maybe move dollars in another way.
Okay.
Yeah, and I always felt like, this is a community engagement grant. The majority of the funds must be going to the community, just flat out, no question about it. At least half, and what it ended up being in our budget was 2/3 to 3/4 of each of our budget ended up going back into the community, and I think that makes the most sense. These pilot grants are wonderful opportunities to build trust and maybe work toward a grant in the future at the R21, R01 kind of PCORI level, where PI is going to get 20% of the time protected, but this pilot grant wasn't that. It was a grant kind of built on passion and partnership. And admittedly, I probably donated some volunteer hours, but I wanted to. This is something that was very important to me. And I think from a typical funding perspective for an academic lead, sometimes forgoing a little bit of extra FTE so that you can build trust and have ongoing relationships is really important. So almost all of our money in both cycles went back into the community in some form, whether it was through paying Adrian's salary, incentives for individuals who are coming, honoraria for the congregations who are hosting us, honoraria for the people who are helping connect us into the community, right? So just very kind of clear and upfront division right off the bat that we wanted most of this money going back into the community.
Sounds great. That's so important. Thanks for those answers.
Gordon, was there anything else you wanted to add as far as your role with this particular project?
No, not really. I mean, they were just, I found them very easy to coach. They were very self-sufficient. When they had a question, they would bring it to me. Like Josh said, that when they got to the point to where some of the resources that they had, they wanted to use it for a different thing. They would always bring that to me, and I was like, absolutely, I'm sure that would be fine, but let's go back to the source and just be sure. And they were very successful with getting approval to pivot and to use the grant money for different things, like in bringing in the Latino churches. That wasn't originally written into the grant, but that was a wonderful pivot to be able to include, to get the perspective of a whole nother community. Could they have just done that? Yeah, probably. But was it best to go back to the grant source and get approval? Absolutely. And so I think they did everything that needed to happen. Once again, I was just kind of coaching and leading and saying, yeah, that's a good idea.
That's what coaches do.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, this has been fantastic. We're going to zoom out now a little bit from our fishbowl, and Jordan is going to put us into breakout rooms. We'll be in those rooms for 7 minutes. So go ahead and click on the join button. We'll see you in those rooms.
Maybe I'll start with Adrian. And Lorenzo, I don't know if you caught some too, but Adrian, do you want to ask and maybe answer or throw to someone else one of those questions?
Oh, the first one I remember is, how often do we meet? And so Josh, correct me if I'm wrong. I would say probably like at least once every couple of weeks in persons in the early stages, but we were consistently emailing and texting each other when we weren't physically meeting. And then also with our advisory board, we meet once a month. So I would say on average in person once every couple of weeks. And then a lot of communication via text and email. Does that sound right to you, Josh?
Yeah, and I think your comment about more frequently earlier on is spot on. So we were doing a lot of work up front as we were writing these grant proposals and meeting more frequently to talk about them. I think one of the things that the pandemic did change was just making it easier for us to meet in a different format through Zoom. And those community advisory board meetings, which previously were very tricky to coordinate in person pre-pandemic, have now moved seamlessly online to Zoom in the evenings, which has been a really nice way for us to stay in touch with our community advisors.
Yeah. Hey, do you want to spend a little time talking about how we tailored the presentation for groups over time, different groups over time?
Yeah, I think that probably gets back to the question that we saw about how do we know kind of what the community is wanting. That was one of the questions on the JAM board. And I think what we did early on is ended up being really helpful and fruitful. So each congregation that we visited in our first formative year of partnership, we asked a member of the congregation, whether it was an attendee at the event or one of the lay leaders or clergy who was from the organization, to join our community advisory board and to meet with us once a month moving forward, to continue to give us feedback and advice on how to kind of continue to conduct our events and write future grant proposals, define future research questions, so on and so forth. And so by the end of our first year, we had a community advisory board of 9 individuals, and then Adrian and myself, so 11 in total. And those were from 5 different faith communities. And it was a very diverse group as well, which was intentional on our part. And, as kind of we talked about at the very beginning of the introductions, Pablo Zavala, one of the community advisory board members, ended up feeling passionately enough about the topic that he wanted to then go and duplicate and replicate these efforts in Latino Spanish-speaking faith communities during our second grant. And so it ended up being a really kind of important way for us to listen to that voice and then allocate funds from our grant to write them a little bit differently, right? So that would be one great example of listening to what the community is saying that we needed. We had a community advisory board member saying, this is great that we're doing this work in Black faith communities. We need also to be doing this work in Latino faith communities. How can we get funding to do that? And so Adrian and I went back to the CCTSI, asked for a rearranged budget, and then we were able to support Pablo to do a few, I think 6 additional events in Latino faith communities. And Pablo and I were also able to secure additional funding through a different mechanism. So we ended up having a total of, I think it was like 18 events by the time we were done. Almost 10 or 11 of them were in Spanish-speaking faith communities. And so we ended up doing more work per se, or reaching more people in Spanish-speaking faith communities, precisely because of Pablo's desire.
Well, the other thing I would add to that is in our early grant work, working with the faith leader as well as the people who were leaders in the congregation about asking about what would work well for that congregation helped also. That helped create an effective and safe environment and helped us draw people to that event. So I think that was another key point, is just the upfront work.
That's great. Gordon, I know you were capturing some of the questions as well. Do you want to choose one and throw one out there? Or answer it? And you're on mute. You're on mute, Gordon.
Sorry, I have 3 screens in front of me and my cursor gets lost. So one of them that I thought was good was, were there any barriers with getting the buy-in to have vaccination clinics at these events, especially at a faith event or a place of faith? What was there any challenges even to getting them to allow you to bring the vaccines in?
That's a great question. So part of the journey over this past year has been one of essentially moving our project from one in which we were just listening to one in which we were measuring the impact of these events on attitudes toward vaccines, and then moving finally into one where we're listening, measuring impact, and offering vaccination services. And so the last 5 events that we did, 3 in Spanish-speaking faith communities and 2 in Black faith communities, we co-hosted mobile vaccination services. And what we actually tried to do was find faith communities who were already interested in doing that and then partner with them. And one of the things that we heard a couple times was that faith communities who were hosting a vaccination event really wanted someone who would be on site to answer questions about the vaccines. And so it was a natural confluence of interests. They were able to host mobile vaccination services, and we're able to allow individuals who want their questions answered to come to a session, get breakfast, get lunch beforehand, and then get a vaccine. And I think that just speaks to kind of what we've realized is that in a given faith community situated in a given neighborhood, there might be 500 individuals. Of those 500, there might be 400 interested in getting a vaccine, and there might only be 50 who have very genuine questions that they want answered prior to getting the vaccine. It might be that the other 315 just want a convenient place to get a vaccine and they've already made up their mind. And so a little bit of the work that we've been doing as well is just realizing, so who's the target audience here, and understanding that we're not going to be reaching every single person with these listening circles, that really the listening circle is a mechanism for addressing questions as they come up. Not everyone necessarily wants to come to a listening circle, but they appreciate the opportunity to go to their house of worship and get a vaccine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know your academic community partnership sounds like one of those matches made in heaven, but I'm sure that every partnership has its issues. And one of the questions is, did you guys run into people who were hesitant to participate in your work? And how did you overcome that? And were there any differences between the academic and the community partnership, or people, I should say, that you guys had to overcome?
So now, are you describing this as a match made in heaven because we're faith-based? Is that why you're saying that?
Yes, very good.
I have my moments. Yeah, I was just thinking about that. So some people, I think really the stumbling blocks in getting connected to some communities was just the faith leader was just busy. And it was just hard to get that person's attention to walk through it and then get the ball rolling. So I didn't sense a lot of, hesitancy about being in the partnership with this. I think it was just a logistical thing. And, but there were a couple of examples where I know faith leaders that have a congregation that has mixed perspectives. And as increasingly vaccines have become controversial, some were they were wary that it might, create a lot of dissension within the congregation. So that was just a few examples. I think really it was a challenge just to get somebody to focus, hear what we're trying to do, and then provide the support so we could actually do the event with their congregation. That's kind of what I experienced.
Yeah, don't let me forget though, man, our drive to the Springs with, pizza for 3 people, so it wasn't all daisies and roses. Adrian and I coordinated an event in Colorado Springs, and when we did the initial planning meeting with the faith leader there, the faith leader was very excited, said that there were going to be hundreds of people in attendance, like we're going to be turning them away at the door, like how much pizza can you bring? We got there and there was one person, the janitor, who needed to open the building, who ended up showing up, right? And that kind of moment is heartbreaking. That's hard to deal with. It's kind of like it's a moment for practicing humility. But I think we learned a lot from that one event, which is that, number one, the faith leader had advertised the event, but had not committed to going to the event. And number two, there was not another kind of lay person in the congregation who was kind of actively outreaching and trying to, stir up interest in the event as well. And so I think something that we took away from that event was, we want to be partnering with leaders who aren't just in favor of the event, but who are actively supporting the event. And there's a difference there, right? Because people are busy. And so as it happened, the faith leader in this community ended up going on vacation the weekend that we hosted the event. And so blasted off an email and said, you all should come, and then left, right? And that's a different level of engagement and involvement and partnership than I'm going to be here at 9 a.m. and we're all going to eat pizza together, right? Or 10 a.m., whenever people eat pizza. And so that was a learning moment for me.
And then it also, that learning moment led to an important pivot for us, because we actively started engaging with the faith community, so that when they were already meeting, we were there to make an announcement ahead of time if the event was going to be, at some time when they weren't meeting. But even if it was at another time when they were meeting, it was very important to get that first contact point with the congregation. So that really brought it home to us. So that was an important pivot. And we saw, I think, great attendance after that, and marked kind of improvement in that area.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. That was a huge change, Adrian, brought on by that event. So previously what we had done was we had just coordinated to host an event, but we'd actually never met with the community prior to showing up for the event of interest. And what we decided is that because we wanted to build trust, we wanted to be present for a normal meeting day without any agenda, just to be present for the congregation's normal meeting. And then we wanted to return 1 to 2 weeks later to do the event. And that ended up, like you said, Adrian, yielding so much fruit, just because people got to meet us, see us. I would bring my wife and kids to these events sometimes, get to ask us questions, say, hey. And then by the time we ended up meeting them for the actual event 1 or 2 weeks later, it was like we're almost old friends. So I think that was a really pivotal learning moment, even though at the time it felt fairly humiliating.
Yeah, that one hurt, man. That was a lonely, well, I guess it wasn't lonely because the two of us were together, but that was a rough drive back.
Dude, I've never seen someone eat so much pizza.
I had a quick question for you. In your outreach, it came in the phase 2 of your project to the Latino community. In creating a safe space, did you consider the culture and traditions of that particular community? And if so, how did you incorporate that?
Yeah, it's unfortunate Pablo is not here, because he really did that work and did a great job. And the response was just amazing. When we got his feedback, his notes, we could tell that they were very, very, very good meetings and discussions. And so, I think in those communities, it was really key to have the faith leader involved. I think that generated a lot of interest and participation. I would say more so than what we saw in other faith communities. Like I thought there was going to be a similar dynamic in the Black community with the African-American churches. And it wasn't as pronounced as what we saw in the Spanish-speaking churches, Latino communities. So that was interesting to me.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, hopefully we can get Pablo to help answer some of these questions on paper and send them out to the group. But I think he spoke multiple times about the respect that is in Latino communities for physicians and for clergy. And so it wasn't necessarily that we were doing any kind of cultural adjustments to the program per se. It was more that in the Latino community, there was already that level of trust and respect for community leaders such as a physician or a clergy person. And that really drew people then to attend, especially when their clergy person said, I'm going to be there and so should you.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
I will say I saw one interesting question about how did Josh keep going when people kept saying, I don't want to partner with you. And honestly, it was hard. And I remember after one particularly devastating rejection from someone who I thought would be a perfect match for this work, kind of going home and crawling into my bed at like 2 o'clock and pulling over the covers over my face and just kind of taking a nap. Like, I just need to take a nap. And then I woke up the next day and I said, hey man, I'm gonna email this Adrian Miller guy and see if he's gonna meet with me. And so I guess I would say, if it's something that you're passionate about, you'll find someone who is also passionate about it. It might take time, and you might end up having, some very disappointing conversations along the way. But I think there's enough interested parties out there that if you're persistent, you'll find someone. And I think a little bit of what I've learned with community engagement, kind of, again, it's a small, big city, and a lot of people know a lot of people. And so the more that you get out there and start meeting people, the more names that you'll hear. And I'd encourage you just to email those people, call those people, right? Set up coffee. The more people you meet with, the better you understand where they're coming from, what their organizational priorities might be, and how you can better kind of partner with them if they would be a good partner, and if they have the time and the interest and opportunity to do so.
That's really terrific. And as we're coming to the end, how are you, or did you already give back to the community what you learned? What were your processes to do that?
So from my end, with the Colorado Council of Churches, we represent over about 800 churches around the state of Colorado. And so what we did is we would give people progress reports on what we were doing. And certainly, within the bounds of confidentiality and the parameters of it, but, we'd let people know what was going on. And I have always told my board members who feed into these denominations, hey, if you want to build on this work, this is a great experience that we've had. And they've been very supportive in both phases of this project and in other things that we've endeavored to do. So try to report back. And then I have relationships with many of the faith leaders that we met with. And so, just informally, just circling back with them and ask them how they thought it went and things like that. And then hopefully seeking other future opportunities for collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the community advisory board members that we recruited have been helpful as far as going back into their faith communities and saying, hey, this is the summary of the questions that were asked at the event last week, in case anyone else in the community is interested in reading them. We are also very intentional about trying to share published results in media with our community partners as well. And so as different local pieces have been written about the partnership, we've shared those out with the faith community so they can see, oh, this is something that's being recognized as being important, but then also publications. And so giving people an opportunity to see the hard products that have come of this partnership as well. And so far, we've been fortunate to have a few. And then also when it comes to authorship even, right? So making sure that Adrian is an author on these articles, right? We're co-authors on these articles. And when it comes to future grants, giving community advisory board members who are interested an opportunity to be a part. So Pablo, for example, has been expressed an interest, and we just submitted a grant for addressing misinformation through novel strategies. And so we made sure to provide time for Adrian and for Pablo on that grant as well. And so I think part of going back to the community with the academic products also kind of recognizes just how important they are to the products and to the partnership, and making sure that they're equally represented in those dissemination projects.
All right. Well, we're about 4 minutes before the hour. I want to just give a big thanks to our presenters, Josh, Adrian, and Gordon, and to our moderators, Leslie and Lorenzo, and finally to our partners in allowing us to present these forums, Accords and CCTSI. Josh and Adrian have promised to work on answering questions that they didn't get to, and we'll try and make sure that those are shared out, as well as this is being recorded, as I think was posted in the chat, and we'll let our attendees let you all know when that's released as well, so that you can have that and share it with your colleagues who might not have been able to attend today. Last but not least, please fill out our survey. I'm especially interested in what you thought about this kind of fishbowl format that we tried today. Yeah, Leslie, you put that in the chat too. Thanks. The link for the evaluation is here in the chat as well. Please let us know what your thoughts are. And we do take your input very seriously as we design these. So once again, thanks to our partners and our moderators, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Yep.
Bye.
Peace.
Thank you.